I'm joined now by some really exciting guests. We have Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz and Nick Kovacevic. He's the CEO of Kushco Holdings, here to join us to talk about the MORE Act. So, Congressman, let's kick this right off. Let's start with you. You were the only Republican co-sponsor of the bill in the House, and the vote did fall mostly along party lines. So even if Democrats win the runoffs in Georgia, many have said that the MORE Act doesn't really stand a chance in the Senate. That said, what is the best case scenario for this bill?
Well, the federal government urgently needs to modernize our cannabis policy for the very reasons that Brad laid out in his report. In states from Mississippi to New Jersey and almost everywhere in between, we're seeing cannabis reform advance at the state level as a consequence of people voting for it on ballot initiatives. Now here, the MORE Act takes cannabis decriminalization at the federal level, and it mixes it with a number of policies that really do reparations for communities that were hit hardest by the war on drugs. And while I do believe in restorative justice, I probably prefer my cannabis policy not dipped in reparations because, as you correctly point out, that divides the pro-cannabis movement in Washington, D.C., because for our coalition to succeed, we need those who support decriminalization because they see the negative impacts of the war on drugs, and we need that right-wing libertarian coalition, people like Rand Paul and Mike Lee, who understand in our federalist system these decisions actually are best left to states. But as I'm sure Nick can share with you, the lack of action at the federal level has really paralyzed cannabis businesses that want to be able to raise money. They want to be able to utilize the tax code to be able to meet the needs of our fellow Americans who could see an improvement to their life as a result of cannabis.
And I do want to get to Nick in just a minute, but I want to follow up on something you said there quickly, Congressman. I know you believe cannabis is or should be a bipartisan issue, but Democrats, especially in the House, are working really hard to make themselves the party of record for cannabis. So what is it going to take at this point to make Republicans come around to this issue?
I've got work to do with many of my fellow Republicans, but I have found, Chloe, that this issue divides as much along generational lines as among partisan lines. So maybe the answer isn't trying to convince a bunch of boomer Republicans to alter views that they've had for decades. Maybe the answer is to work with some of the younger Republicans. And gosh, there aren't too many folks under the age of 45 who believe in federal prohibition of cannabis. And so we've got to create not only a bipartisan coalition, but a coalition that is built on the younger generation, seeing that the federal government has basically lied to our country for 40 years about cannabis and its potential impact on the lives people lead.
Nick, this next one's for you. Prior to the November election, you wrote an op-ed suggesting that Republicans would benefit by embracing legalization and that refusing to might actually hurt them in the elections. We did see Arizona flip blue for Biden, but we did see a red sweep in Montana alongside adult use legalization. So based on the results we saw in November, do you still stand by this position?
I do, and the Congressman has done a great job of trying to make this a bipartisan issue, and it should be. We just don't understand why Republicans aren't embracing it more, and I think the generational divide does have something to do with it. So we expect for people to take this much more serious now after the election. I did call out, and actually I cited something that President Trump had noted, that when cannabis is on the ballot, it turns out an additional amount of voters that normally wouldn't go out and vote, and these voters tend to lean Democrat. So I predicted that Trump might struggle in Arizona. In fact, the state flipped. Montana was interesting because it stayed red, but overwhelming support for cannabis. And as the Congressman mentioned, even in Mississippi, we saw overwhelming support for cannabis. So this is now becoming an issue that almost 70% of Americans are supporting and voting for. And I think it would be very wise for Republicans across the board to figure out how to get on board with this issue. And I agree with the Congressman. There is a great angle here when you think about the Libertarian Coalition. This is something, why not let people choose what they want to ingest or what they want to use? And when you look at the jobs and economic impact this can provide, it becomes a no-brainer for any fiscal conservative when they take a look at the data and what this could actually bring to the U.S. Citizens and to the government as a whole.
Now, we know that cannabis is an increasingly bipartisan issue, as we have been discussing. Congressman, you voted in favor of the MORE Act, despite the fact that your amendments, which would have removed a lot of those equity provisions that you were discussing a little bit earlier, were rejected. So why did you compromise and support this bill instead of perhaps waiting around for something more palatable to you, like, say, the STATES Act?
Well, I've learned in Washington you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And for me, I saw the way my constituents I see the way my constituents are impacted, rather, by federal policy that doesn't allow more research. It doesn't allow businesses that provide cannabis services to be able to utilize the tax code and in turn meet the needs of their customers more efficiently and more effectively. And so while I would prefer to separate social justice issues from just the meat and potatoes of cannabis reform, I understood that that was the only way I could vote for a repeal of these prohibition laws was to accept that some of the tax money coming in from cannabis would be dictated from Washington, D.C. Now, that's not my preference, but I also do understand, Chloe, that the war on drugs did impact Black and brown communities disproportionately, and so I do have room in my mind and in my heart for policies that try to do better by those who may have been incarcerated unfairly, who may still need expungements to their record. That's an important part of cannabis policy, and we ought to do that alongside the economic issues that Nick was mentioning.
Yeah, and as you were referencing there, we do know an overwhelming majority of Americans are supportive of expungement. But moving on here, I want to talk to Nick on this next one. So we have a bunch of different political factors going on here. President-elect Biden about to step into the White House. We know there's uncertainty around the MORE Act remaining in the Senate, but we also have signals from House Democrats that cannabis is going to be top of mind in the next session. So based on all of these factors, how is the cannabis industry looking out on the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, the cannabis industry is as optimistic as we've ever been. I think this election spoke volumes, following it up with the historic MORE Act vote in Congress. We know there's challenges in the Senate as it sits today, but still it just speaks to the momentum behind the sector. And so we have phenomenal markets opening up. New Jersey's a huge market that voted on November 3rd. And we expect that's going to be a domino that's going to actually unlock a lot of the Northeast. We've heard governors of Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York, all talking about legalizing cannabis in the coming years. And so these are just more markets that we're converting from the illicit market that exists today to the legal market. And that means people are going to be applying for permits. They're going to be hiring staff. They're going to be looking to make inroads. And keep in mind, it's not just plant-touching companies. As you guys know, Kushco Holdings, we provide ancillary products like packaging and labeling and supplies. And we've employed over 100 people because of the unprecedented growth we've had over the last 5 or 6 years. We're just one of many companies in this ecosystem that are creating jobs, that are creating taxes for state and local governments. And we're thinking, hey, the federal government should get some action as well. And that's what I think a lot of politicians are seeing too. This could be a huge boom economically for our country in a time of need. So people are preparing. Stocks have gone up. You've seen that. Investors are recognizing the opportunity here, and it's only expected to get more and more momentum with the Biden administration coming in. We know that they have a goal of decriminalizing cannabis. The fact of the matter is they're not where they need to be in terms of legalizing cannabis. We think it's a little draconian, their position, but hopefully that improves. And with support of other, folks in government that are saying the right things and are making the right arguments, we think people's opinions will continue to change in the right direction. And it's really, most people are saying only a matter of when, not if, cannabis will get legal at the federal level and unlock massive economic opportunity for every company in the space.
And Congressman, the MORE Act certainly hasn't passed yet. We have seen it pass through one chamber of Congress. How do you expect this will impact momentum on the state level when it comes to legalization, and particularly even in your own home state of Florida with adult use?
I do believe that more and more states are going to view the progress we've made in Washington as some semblance of a green light to advance some of their own cannabis policies that are percolating through state legislatures. Now, I don't know that Florida will go to adult use. We've got a medical program there that's working very well. And, each state is a little different. In Florida, it's very tourism oriented. Walt Disney has a big say in the policies that impact the Sunshine State. But I do think that the way cannabis policy advances most effectively is at the state level. I don't want to see the federal government take control of cannabis policy and have a one-size-fits-all system. We ought to have a permissive platform, and then as different states decide what's the right mix for them, my expectation is that best practices will emerge, they'll be copied, and that'll ultimately be better for people all around the country. I am concerned right now that the Congressional Black Caucus is blocking a vote on the States Act, which you, I think, very accurately mentioned in your reporting, would be a way to simply make that devolution to the states without a federal control system overlaying the paradigm. That would be my preference, and it might be the final bipartisan solution that is necessary to get approval from the Senate.
Congressman and Nick, thank you so much today for sharing your insights with us in this very exciting time for the cannabis industry. Again, that is Nick Kovacevic. He's the CEO of Kushco Holdings, and Representative Matt Gaetz of Florida.
This is Congressman Matt Gaetz. If you liked that video, make sure you like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on social media, and join us on our daily podcast, Hot Takes with Matt Gaetz, on your favorite podcast listening platform.